All right, so it's 7 o'clock. Let's get started. So thanks everybody for bearing with me last week. Interesting week, but we got through it. So today we're going to do what last week's topic was, which was the injuries most common to basketball and a few things on how to prevent them and also how to perhaps treat them. So I'm going to start from basically the bottom of the body and work up, simply because basketball seems to be mostly lower body injuries anyway. And I figure those will be things you guys are more familiar with, and then we'll work our way up to the head. So the first area is obviously the foot and ankle, and which is interesting in basketball. And you guys heard me last week, or sorry, 2 weeks ago, when I brought the two shoes. So the basketball shoe or court shoe has that flat bottom, and it's an anti-slip bottom. And so one thing that a basketball shoe does is prevent injuries. And so we tend to use the basketball shoe to prevent slipping and sliding on the court. And we also use the basketball shoe for a prevention of weaker ankles. So the injuries to the lower extremities are mostly rolled ankles, some fractures. I haven't seen too many ankle fractures in basketball. But what happens is you go up the rebound or you go up for a shot, you come down, there's a body there. So we call under the net a very high traffic area. And in a high traffic area, there could be a number of different feet. And when you land, you can land on someone's foot. So instead of just rolling with just your foot and the ligaments being a few inches off the ground, now you're landing on someone else's foot, and now your foot rolls 3, 4, 5, 6 inches until it reaches the ground. So ankle sprains are extremely common in basketball, and we see obviously more severe ones in basketball and volleyball, simply because we have those extra feet that tend to be around us, and because our feet leave the ground and come back down. So those are the biggest ones. Sometimes we get something called a talar injury, which is an injury in the talus, which is the bone that sits, sorry as I lose my pen, between the two ankle bones. And it sits like this. And the downfall to the court shoe is because it sticks. If you stop, but your momentum of your body is to keep going forward, what sometimes happens is that talus drives forward, and there's a ligament that wraps in the front. It is considered a high ankle sprain, but it is a lower inferior tib-fib ligament as opposed to an ankle ligament. So it's a lower leg ligament. Well, those ligaments can get sprained too. Not necessarily considered ankle, but more considered a foot or higher ankle sprain. So those are common as well. That's about it. Sometimes you'll get stub toes that stub into the foot, or a turf toe. But again, if the shoe fits properly and we use our basketball shoes properly, we won't get as many of the injuries we would see more commonly in turf or in soccer kind of injuries. The next one would be hip and thigh. The hip and thigh area in basketball is more common with bruises. If we're, I'm going to go back to the knee in a second. I'm going to go hip and thigh first. And that's really about it. Some muscle straining, not as common because there's short burst movements. So the most things we'll see in the hip and thigh will be bruises. The big area will be knees. So in basketball, we already have a body type that's longer, typically, not everybody, but typically, and we already run problems with growing. So playing a jump sport, playing basketball during growth phases, we end up with some issues that are not basketball related. They're growing related, but they certainly make basketball difficult. And that's things like chondromalacia, patellofemoral pain syndrome, and Osgood-Schlatters. And those are ones that definitely are exacerbated by jumping and those short burst movements, but not necessarily caused by basketball, just aggravated by basketball. And they are things that we would have to treat throughout the season. They're not very easy to prevent because there's no way to know when your growth spurts are going to be versus your seasons. And there's a lot of things that go on through the knee. The knee is a hinge joint, and it's a fairly complicated joint in the sense that a lot of vulnerability for injuries, and we see a ton of them. The big thing is, the good news is we don't typically see ACL. So most of the injuries to the knee are non-surgical or non-orthopedic, in the sense that we don't usually need to see a surgeon for them. They're usually rehabable, usually therapy and modifying some of your training. But most of you have probably had a knee injury or a knee pain in your basketball time, and some of them are trauma related, like an LCL or an MCL, which are ligaments on either side of the knee. But typically we see a combination of a growing issue matched with the fact that you jump and land. And those are the ones that give you the flare-ups, Osgood-Schlatter's, chondromalacia, and patellofemoral. And I treat those all the time. So they are definitely something that are manageable, but not necessarily do you recover until you are done your growing. So just so you understand, an injury to the ankle, an injury to the hip, we would be aiming on having you recover fully from those. Things that happen at the knee, sometimes it's more management and not a recovery. So slightly different, but again, depends on what it is. From there, I like to go low back, not as common, but they're more sore muscles, especially if you get, you go up and someone hits you, you are bent over. Sometimes it's just from being over and dribbling for hours and hours and hours, and the low back gets tight. We don't typically see a trauma to the low back, but we do see muscle tightness. And those are things that stretching, foam rolling, obviously Dr. Cam's kin stretching, Crystal's yoga work, all those things typically can manage low back, so can massage and myself. So again, I don't typically see trauma, but things that can certainly cause you pain and discomfort. And we do want to address them because they will influence the way that you can train, and they'll definitely influence your mechanics for dribbling, because you're going to try to stand up a little bit more, rotate a little less. So the way you're going to maneuver with the ball and around a court will change drastically if your back is bugging you. But again, a nice easy fix typically, and something that we can get you through. The next one, as we creep up the upper body, shoulders. I haven't seen too many injuries in the shoulders in basketball. Sometimes you'll get, if you're going up to block, you might get a bit of a strain. But in 20 years, I don't know if I've seen two real basketball injuries in the shoulders. They're more common in swimmers and volleyball players. So shoulders usually not a high risk. Go down, elbows, same thing, not a high risk. It would be more if you fell on the elbow, that would certainly cause a trauma, but it'd be more of a bruise or bursitis. The other one would be hands and wrists, and those are from 9 times out of 10. If you're falling, someone takes your feet out, you get pushed, you naturally put your arms out so that the wrists will contact the ground first. And that's a tough one to prevent because that's more subconscious and more of a protective mechanism. Some athletes I know in the sub 5, when I was watching them land, they were really good with landing and pushing. So depending on what way they landed, they would impact with their hands, but they used momentum to kind of bring themselves back. So instead of landing really, really hard on the hand and wrist, they used that to kind of almost push off, and they would slide. And that would actually, from physics, from laws of physics, that would actually allow several parts of your body to absorb force and move it down the chain. So it wasn't generated so drastically through the wrist. If you don't do that and you land hard enough on the wrist, then we run chances of dislocations. Obviously, there are several wrist fractures, lower arm fractures, scaphoid fractures, and things like that from landing. And those are possible and definitely common. We've had a few throughout the last couple of years. I do see them with Laurentian and all age groups. So again, it just comes down to a fluke more than anything, nothing you can prevent. You can certainly work on trying to land, but you run the risk of injuring something if you do. Fingers are common in basketball. So when you don't accept the ball properly and you jam a finger, there are plate issues. So when you jam, you can actually damage the joints inside the fingers, the capsules, the ligaments, all those things. And that's when you'll see like a really big joint and swollen. Those typically, we can buddy tape them. They get better, but you'll always have a slightly larger looking joint. And that's just because the type of impact trauma just doesn't heal well. And you'll potentially get some arthritis as you get older. But those are all fairly mild. You can dislocate a finger. If you take a ball directly to it, you might find that all of a sudden it's crooked and it's dislocated. That obviously would involve a physician to put that back in, and then we would tape it or show you some rehab exercises. That would be a significant enough trauma that you'd probably not be able to handle a ball for a few weeks to a few months. But that's typically those, upper body ones. Everything in the upper body is fairly mild, and not a lot of preventative measures can you put in place because they're going to be mostly flukes. And the way your body, maybe a mistake you make, bad timing accepting the ball or moving through the court. The biggest thing in the upper body is the brain and the head and concussions. And I have seen an enormous, crazy amount. I have seen more in basketball than I've seen in hockey and football combined in the last probably 5 to 7 years. And it's the high elbows. It's just, it's landing and whipping. Hard to say if there's any other mechanisms, because women's basketball for Laurentian last year alone probably had, and some of them were doubles and triples for the same athlete, I would say 16 to 20 concussions throughout that team. Men's basketball, there was a period of time in women's basketball where they had to put the trainer on the court. She was a previous basketball player and chose to be the trainer that year. And she actually had to be rostered because they had no healthy girls. Men's hockey last year had to move 2 defensemen to forwards because they were down 5 to 7 concussions all at the same time. So concussions are definitely more prevalent. We're seeing them more often, I think, because of education. I think because we realize that they can be managed, they can be treated, and we can't take them lightly anymore. And so we are seeing a ton of them in all sports, and basketball is one of them. So the big thing with concussions, guys, is it used to be somewhat accepted that if you got your bell rung or you woke up the next day with a sore neck and a headache, that was okay. And you have to remember with concussions, you don't ever need to hit your head. You can land on your butt and you can get a concussion. And anything that you're concerned about, whether it's neck pain, a headache, nausea, sensitivities to light and to noise, if you're having any mood changes, if you're having differences in sleep. So to give you an idea with a concussion, the first couple nights you may sleep like you've got mono, like you are going to be out and dead to the world. And then that energy crisis will shift. And then as the brain needs to retrain certain parts of the brain to get wired and started back up and try to fix some of the neurons and the axons, you will actually have sleep-wake problems. So you'll have trouble falling asleep, you fall asleep, you'll wake up 2 hours later. So if you're seeing any of those changes in sleep patterns, we need to know about it. Because again, an elbow to the head, and it might not even be basketball related, but let's just, stick to the basketball related ones. But if there's a possibility of a concussion, let us know. We're seeing way too many chronic issues and way too many unresolved ones. And, you get another one, obviously the rule of thumb is if you haven't fully recovered from one and you get another, it doesn't take anywhere near the same impact or force, and your symptoms are right back. We certainly understand a lot more about concussions since Sidney Crosby did his stuff back in 2014, I think it was, and which has benefited everybody around the world. And so now we understand that there's several different types, and we're given, Chicago Blackhawks has done a beautiful job creating an exertion program. Buffalo has created a really good treadmill test. So the teams and the leagues have created their own ways about trying to get their athletes back. And there's some really neat ways to get you guys tested, managed, treated, and back. So please don't think just because you didn't hit your head that there's no way possible that you could have a concussion. And if you don't, you don't. But if you do, it's pretty easy to tell. It takes us about an hour, 30 minutes to an hour. And then that way we can tell you how to protect yourself and make sure that you guys are recovering. But again, preventatively for a head trauma, keep your eyes open, but there's not a whole lot you can do. It's part of the nature of the sport to have the arms up, and obviously things, the upper body is going to be flailing a little bit, and movements are quick and jerky. So timing is really tough to control, especially when it's another player. So there's no real preventative measures when it comes to the brain. The big thing with the brain is if you suspect it, let somebody know. See a doctor, walk-in clinic. Myself, Dr. Cam, I'm pretty sure is probably trained in it. Any one of us could take a quick look and see what we should be doing with you. And there's definitely protocols. From my facility perspective, we do supplements. We do, believe it or not, an anti-inflammatory diet plan. We do a lot of education. We do a sleep hygiene. We go over education for your sport, your school, your daily routine. So it's a pretty elaborate program when it comes to concussions. And we just want to make sure that everybody recovers fully and recovers properly. So those are pretty much the basketball injuries in a nutshell. There's, again, if we kind of walk it back up, you've got more trauma likely to happen in the ankle and the knees, shins a little bit. Then the knees tend to be a little bit more growth related in relation to the jumping and the landing. As you go up to the hips, more than not, they're going to be bruises, maybe the bursitis, some sprains and strains. Low back is usually tight muscles, sometimes a little sprain or strain. And then you go up, shoulders not as often, elbows not as often, wrists and hands a little bit more severe, anywhere from fractures, dislocations, definitely sprains and strains. And then of course, in the head, we've got concussions. So those are pretty much all of them. The biggest thing preventatively is to make sure you've got the right footwear. Make sure the footwear you're wearing is for the skill that you're doing. If you're running sprints on your street, you probably shouldn't be in basketball shoes. If you're doing drills with a basketball in your driveway, you probably shouldn't be in running shoes. So, making sure that the footwear matches what your skill is really important. Making sure that you pay very, very close attention to what Dr. Cam is doing and what Crystal's doing. They're the two in this whole thing that are probably creating the biggest preventative platform that we have. And they're making sure that the body is toned, the body is ready, the body is stretched, lengthened, all those things. And they're the ones that will prevent most of these injuries, which is something that most athletes, even at the NHL level, don't typically have the preventative piece. They definitely have the rehab and the therapy piece, but they don't have preventative. And basketball is one of the better sports for preventative in terms of their warm-ups and the education piece. So make sure that when you're doing it or when you're watching it, you're really keeping an eye on it and you're really focused and taking it in, because this is a piece that hats off to Kyle and Northern Lights basketball, because he's setting your body up at your ages for things that I can tell you for sure he never had and most basketball players don't have. So what he's able to do for you guys on that platform is everything included in a nutshell is preventative. And it's lengthening the body, it's getting the body prepared for landing and jumping and movement which is incredibly important. Obviously, Lana plays a big role in there too with the strength and conditioning, which we sometimes forget about in different age groups. Through the decades, you know, there's been kids shouldn't do strength, kids can, they shouldn't, body weighted only. And there's a lot of conflicting research and views and opinions on that. But understand that if you are relatively slow to stopped in a growing time frame in a spurt, then you absolutely can produce strength, and you absolutely can prevent trauma by doing strength training. If you're in a growth spurt and you're very, very sore in the knees and shins, then, you know, let Kyle know, let Atlanta know, and let everybody in your team know that you may have to take a week or so and do something a little differently. And maybe it's another session of Dr. Cam's and you redo it as opposed to moving through the strength piece. And that comes back to that time where Dr. Cam did a recovery session for himself because he knew his body couldn't do it. You guys need to do the same thing. We don't know what you're feeling. So if you're feeling sore, then it should be something recovery. Reach out and we can make sure that what you're doing that particular day basically complements what your body's doing as opposed to harm it. And again, everything that's coming through in this program is setting your bodies up so it can handle everything. And, you know, making sure that your hand-eye coordination and reaction time and all those fine details are trained at the same level. So if you're looking at strength training and you're, you know, doing all these really husky and heavy lifts, well, you're going to lose power, you're going to lose speed, and you're certainly going to lose agility. You'll have strength. And then if all you do is sprints, then what's going to happen is you're going to lose strength and you're going to lose a little bit of power. So everything needs to be given its time and everything needs to be given a phase. And a lot of times we'll strength train, then we might do some explosive power. Then we're going to take those two and we're going to give you speed. If we don't keep adding speed in, you get slower and then you get bulkier. And then you forget how to use those two items in a functional way. So Crystal's been really good at that. I've been watching her stuff and she's making sure that a lot of the principles that you guys are doing, she's making sure that your bodies stay functional. That's huge and preventative, huge. So, you know, you can want a certain look, but understand that that certain look doesn't necessarily make it a functional movement or a functional entity. So, you know, and you may want to be long and skinny and you don't want any muscle. Well, that's going to help you perhaps with explosion, and that's going to help you perhaps with maybe speed, but you're not going to have a lot of power, you're not going to have a lot of speed, a lot of strength. So remember that you kind of need a little bit of everything in basketball, and you can't get away with missing any of those principles because you're going to notice it in your sport, but more importantly, you're going to notice it in the form of an injury. So have a lot of faith in what Kyle's done and what all these practitioners are doing for you, because they're pretty much making this a mindless program in the sense that we're teaching you, but you can have a lot of faith in what they're doing for you because they're making it almost, not that you're not going to get injured because you guys are growing. And again, like I've said in previous ones, you're in your driveway, you're not necessarily on a court, you're not in a gym, you know, so there are things just like people now working from home off their kids' craft table on a computer. They may not have had any upper body issues at work, but they're going to have upper body issues at home. So you are still going to have aches and pains. I just doubt that they're going to be significant traumas. And this program is actually very, very well put together in terms of preventative. And I have a lot of respect for what everybody's doing to help you guys along. So if anybody has any questions, few of you obviously have already reached out and we're dealing with certain aches and pains. Please do not go through them. There's just absolutely no reason to. And I would like to know, you know, if it's a knees or a hip issue right off the hop so we can make those adjustments. And maybe it's get you in, maybe it's teach you how to foam roll. Maybe, like I said, it's to teach you how to know when to take a step back and let your body recover more. The program is based on a lot of science and a lot of theory. But remember, we can't spend that time with you directly. So all these things that everyone's doing is based on the fact that we're assuming your body's adapting as these things change and as we get through, you know, to week 9, 10, 11, and 12 and so on. But if you're not, then we need to know so we can figure out how to sequence that for you so that, one, you get the optimal results, and two, you don't get injured. So definitely anything that's bothering you, growth related, trauma related, or just questions, reach out to me. We'll certainly make sure that those are addressed and you guys don't have to worry about any injuries moving forward. And anybody that's new, I know these are all recorded, so you can go back, but anybody that has any questions about the pre-recording that you guys weren't involved with directly in person, by all means reach out. We did nutrition and obviously muscular growth. We've talked about supplements. We've talked about vitamins. We've talked about food labels and calculations and all those things. So if anybody has any questions about previous recorded sessions, just reach out to me and I'd be happy to help. And especially if you guys, big one will probably be supplements, but if anybody has any questions, reach out and I'd be happy to answer those questions. Otherwise, we're all done. And anybody got questions about tonight?
I just want to say thanks. So someone that's literally, you know, you've named so many of my injuries, right? And they like, shoulders don't happen. I tore my my AC joint, but a fluke accident. Both elbows have chips, but diving, fluke accidents, right?
Yep.
So, but like, yeah, it's lower body. Like all of us have done ankles. Knees are kind of, you know, it depends, right? Hopefully nothing serious, but lots of strength. And I think that's probably been one of the most common that we've sent athletes to in the past 2 months. I think also. Hopefully hopefully it's just overuse issues, right?
Yeah. Now, if any of you guys, parents included, have any questions on do I brace, not to brace, tape, not to tape, or kinesio tape, not to kinesio tape, I can certainly add that in one of the talks. It might not be a bad idea to kind of go over the bracing versus taping rules. But for now, if anybody has any questions on whether you should brace, shoot me a text or an email. I'll go through it. It is, again, a little controversial and everyone has their opinions.
I think it's worthwhile. So I'm with the school of thought that if you brace at a young age for no reason, you're setting yourself up maybe for issues down the road.
Absolutely.
You do have a lot of coaches in Sudbury and that's their belief, to brace early no matter what, and I get it. When I played college university, the rule was you either braced or taped. And essentially we were on scholarship or bursary or whatever, right? We were elite athletes, so they expected something. So I get it. I prefer taping over bracing personally.
Me too.
So I had to do both, you know, they were that. But to do it early for no reason, I liked it as maybe a recovery aid. So I think this is a really good topic. Personally, I think that would be
right. So we'll add that in at the end and we'll make sure we cover it.
Yeah, for sure. All right. So thank you, everyone. This will be recorded. Encourage you to reach out to Kim. And next week's topic is, do you know off the top of your head? I got to check.
I do. I have it right here. Taping and prophylactic. That's funny. That's what it is next week.
All right. I love it. So if you could do maybe thumbs. I know some people, like you said, falls, thumbs are kind of like as a coach, I do ankles and thumbs. I don't do a lot of shoulders, like you said. I don't do a lot of knees, but ankles and thumbs seem to be the big thing.
Okay. I can do those.
Awesome.
Yep.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you, everybody.
Canada Day, everybody.
Yes. Enjoy. And tomorrow is Canada Day core workout. So have fun with that.
I like it.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye, everybody.